For 3 decades, The Tonight Show followed a consistent routine. The blue curtain opened. Johnny Carson walked out, smiled, delivered his monologue.
From Hollywood, The Tonight Show, starring Johnny Carson.
And sat behind the desk like nothing could ever go wrong. To millions of viewers, it felt safe, controlled, perfect. But backstage, that control was often an illusion. A former producer once said Johnny didn't need a warning. The moment a guest stepped into the light, he already knew. Not because of what they said, but how they stood, how their eyes moved, how long it took them to focus. Some were relaxed, some were drifting, others were already somewhere else entirely. While the audience laughed, staff watched closely. Cameras stayed wide on purpose. Segments were quietly shortened. Backup plans were whispered through headsets. One staffer admitted there were signals only the crew understood, small gestures that meant the guest was not fully present. This wasn't rare, it wasn't accidental, and it wasn't always harmless. Major, stars, cultural icons, comedy legends.
Johnny Carson ended his 3-decade reign on late-night TV with a retrospective show. There were no celebrity guests, only Johnny and his family, friends, and staff.
Sitting inches from Johnny Carson, while under the influence, sometimes barely holding it together, sometimes crossing lines that nearly stopped the show cold. What viewers saw as smooth television often hid moments of real tension, quick thinking, and damage control. Tonight, we're pulling back that curtain. Stay with us, because the truth behind these 7 guests is more shocking than the laughter ever suggested. George Carlin, the functional stoner.
He is very well respected among performers. He has an album. He writes and performs practically all of his own material. And his album called, that's Kenny Rankin's album. It's also doing well, but that's not the one I wanted. Called, would you welcome George Carlin?
George Carlin didn't stumble onto The Tonight Show. He floated into it, calm and unbothered, like someone who already knew the room would bend to his rhythm. By the early 1970s, the old version of Carlin, the clean suit, neat haircut, polite punchlines, was gone. What walked onto Johnny Carson's stage was a different man entirely. Longer hair framed his face. His movements were slower, almost relaxed to the point of looking careless. But there was nothing careless about his mind. Crew members noticed it immediately. His eyes carried a soft focus. His posture was loose, never stiff, never rushed. No one needed to ask questions out loud. The understanding was quiet and shared. Whatever George was doing before he walked out, it wasn't coffee. Still, no alarms went off, no one panicked, because George always showed up ready. What mattered most was this: he delivered every single time. Carlin spoke with an easy flow that felt unplanned, yet every joke landed exactly where it needed to. His thoughts seemed to drift mid-sentence, taking side roads that felt risky, almost unstable. Then, without warning, he'd circle back and hit harder than expected. The audience didn't lean back in their seats. They leaned forward. That balance between looseness and control was his secret weapon. Johnny Carson picked up on it right away. He didn't try to rein Carlin in. Instead of sharp, boxed-in questions, Johnny opened the space wider. He let pauses breathe. One idea rolled into another. Laughter didn't just come from punchlines, it came from watching a mind work in real time. Johnny knew when not to interrupt, and that trust changed the energy of the interview. Backstage, staff had a nickname for Carlin. They called him reliable, but altered. He was never late, never rude, never unpredictable in a dangerous way. He didn't slur his words or forget where he was, yet no one pretended he was sober. The difference was simple. Carlin didn't fall apart under it. He functioned. George appeared on The Tonight Show more than 100 times. a number few comedians ever reached. But there was a quiet boundary. He was never asked to guest host. Years later, producers admitted why. They trusted his genius, but not the weight of responsibility that came with running the show. Johnny's response to all of this was respect, not exposure. He never joked about it on air. He never defended it either. He let George be George. That quiet understanding between host and guest created moments that still echo in television history today. Richard Pryor. Brilliance on the edge. Richard Pryor didn't just step onto Johnny Carson's stage.
It would embarrass him for me to say this while he was sitting here. I know him, but I think he's one of the true geniuses working comedy today. He's not only thinks funny, he's a skilled comedy actor, and he's got a great string of movies out in recent years, and now he's co-starring in Superman 3. Richard Pryor!
He arrived with an intensity that seemed to ripple through the studio before the lights even hit. Some nights, that fire energized everyone. Laughter came easily. Stories flowed like a perfectly tuned symphony, and the audience was captivated by every word. Other nights, that same spark teetered dangerously close to chaos. His energy could overwhelm, his thoughts racing so fast that sentences fractured, leaving brief but noticeable gaps. Pauses stretched uncomfortably, and the audience sometimes laughed nervously, unsure if the stumble was intentional or a sign that something was off. To casual viewers, it might have looked like an unpredictable bit of comedy. Johnny Carson, however, could read the room, and Pryor like a living score. When Pryor was on point, Johnny stepped back, offering space for his brilliance to shine. The comedian's humor was fearless, sharp, and unfiltered, and Johnny understood that overmanaging him would stifle the magic. But when Pryor's focus faltered, when words slipped, or a story threatened to unravel, Johnny leaned in subtly. A quick question, a well-placed joke, or a gentle redirection could guide Pryor back without interrupting the flow or breaking the rhythm. It was an almost surgical intervention, a way to safeguard the performance while letting the genius take center stage. Crew members who witnessed these moments later described Carson's approach as treating Pryor like a fragile treasure handled with care, never rushed, never humiliated. Pryor's struggles with substances were widely known, but Johnny never made them part of the show's entertainment. There was no judgment in his management, only a deep respect for Pryor's talent, and the understanding that brilliance sometimes arrived with its own complications. After particularly rough appearances, Johnny would discreetly check on him, reaching out through friends or mutual contacts to ensure he was safe. Pryor wasn't banned for erratic behavior, nor was he scolded publicly. Instead, he was carefully guided, protected, and given the chance to shine again. The relationship between Pryor and Carson reflected a rare blend of professional intuition and human empathy. Genius, Johnny knew, could be fragile, and moments like these weren't just about comedy. They were about trust, respect, and the delicate art of managing brilliance on the edge. Pryor's appearances became a study in this balance, where chaos and creativity collided under the watchful eye of a host who knew exactly when to intervene and when to let the fire burn. Truman Capote.
There's a gentleman who a long time ago said I'm as tall as a shotgun and just as noisy. Would you welcome Truman Capote?
When everything collapsed, Truman Capote's entrance that night wasn't subtle. It was alarming. The moment he stepped onto the Tonight Show stage, the energy shifted. Regular viewers would have expected a charismatic, witty literary icon ready to charm both Johnny Carson and the audience. Instead, they were met with a man struggling to stay upright. His speech was slurred, each word dragging as if weighed down by something invisible. His head nodded forward, then jerked up as if waking from a dream he didn't want to leave. Eyes that usually sparkled with sharp observation now seemed heavy, struggling to focus. to follow the rhythm of conversation. This was no playful looseness. It wasn't the creative unpredictability that made certain guests enjoyable or endearing. This was a total failure to function in front of the cameras. Johnny Carson noticed immediately. His sharp instincts, honed over decades, picked up every subtle sign. Instead of panicking on air, he adapted his questions. They became simple, almost perfunctory. Conversations were slowed to a crawl. His reaction shots were extended, filling the silence and giving the audience something steady to focus on. Meanwhile, the control room was anything but calm. Producers, camera operators, and staff stared at monitors, their usual anticipation replaced by tension. Laughter was absent. Nervous smiles flickered as everyone silently counted the minutes until the segment would mercifully end. The green room, usually buzzing with backstage banter, was muted. Experienced crew members later described a feeling of collective dread, a shared awareness that this wasn't just another challenging guest. This was a crisis unfolding live, with no immediate solution. When the segment finally ended, relief washed over everyone, but the sense of gravity didn't fade. Backstage, Johnny's composure cracked, though never for the cameras. His anger was private, but palpable. He stormed through the corridors, voices hushed, speaking sharply to staff members about the breach of professional conduct. Capote had crossed a line Johnny rarely drew. The issue wasn't merely that he was impaired, it was that he had disrespected the show, the audience, and everyone who worked tirelessly to maintain The Tonight Show's polished facade. In Carson's world, some tolerance existed for creative, functional looseness, but this was different. This was chaos that jeopardized the integrity of the broadcast. The aftermath was immediate and decisive. Capote was quietly banned from future appearances. Beyond the individual punishment, the incident sparked lasting procedural changes. Staffers became more vigilant, watching guests closely before they walked on stage. Bars and green room substances were monitored more strictly. Warnings were no longer optional. They were mandatory. Veteran employees later admitted that Capote's appearance became a story passed down to new generations of producers, a cautionary tale emphasizing that talent alone did not excuse unprofessional behavior. On The Tonight Show, the rule was clear. You could arrive altered, even high, and still charm the audience if you functioned. But to arrive unable, to collapse under the spotlight, was unforgivable. Capote's night became a defining lesson, showing the thin line between brilliance and disaster, and cementing Johnny Carson's role not only as a host, but as a guardian of television professionalism. Cheech Marin. Honest from the start.
Today we are truly honored to be joined by Richard Anthony Marin, better known as Cheech Marin.
Cheech Marin never tried to hide who he was or what he might have indulged in before stepping onto the Tonight Show stage. From the moment he appeared, his energy filled the room. His wide grin, playful gestures, and relaxed demeanor made it clear to everyone, crew, audience, and Johnny alike, that this was going to be an unconventional appearance. Unlike guests who tiptoed around expectations or masked their state, Cheech's honesty created an immediate sense of transparency. Backstage, the staff had long grown accustomed to his carefree approach. They knew what to expect, yet every appearance still carried a spark of unpredictability. Johnny Carson, seasoned and perceptive, didn't attempt to rein in Cheech. He understood that resistance could crush the humor or make the interaction awkward. Instead, he leaned into the moment, playing the perfect foil. He used subtle gestures, innocent questions, and exaggeratedly puzzled looks to give Cheech room to riff. Each pause, each spontaneous laugh, and every meandering thought became part of the comedic rhythm. The contrast between Johnny's composed demeanor and Cheech's unfiltered energy created a delicate balance that heightened the audience's enjoyment. This dynamic wasn't improvised chaos, it was a carefully tuned interplay where Johnny's restraint amplified Cheech's spontaneity. Producers loved these segments because they rarely required intervention. Unlike other appearances where staff had to prepare for potential mishaps or guide guests back on track, Cheech's honesty meant there was no tension, no backstage panic. The audience got exactly what they expected: a playful, unpredictable performance that was true to his persona. The humor didn't come from embarrassment or manipulation. It came from authenticity. Cheech's approach removed the need for damage control, letting the camera capture genuine interaction, free-flowing jokes, and infectious laughter. Johnny's handling of Cheech revealed his talent not just as a host, but as a shaper of energy. He didn't fight the momentum or attempt to control the unpredictability. Instead, he channeled it, subtly guiding the flow while letting the guest's natural charm dominate. This approach turned potentially risky appearances into memorable television. In Cheech Marin's segments, honesty was the anchor, spontaneity was the engine, and Johnny's mastery of timing ensured the ride was entertaining from start to finish. Tommy Chong. When being high was the brand.
You ready for the Marisha Marijuana, the Pope of Dope? Let's stand up and give him a warm welcome, Mr. Tommy Chong.
Tommy Chong was, in many ways, the living embodiment of a persona that didn't hide its truth, it flaunted it. Unlike other guests who might attempt to mask the effects of substances or maintain a facade of conventional professionalism, Chong's identity was intertwined with his relaxed, carefree, and undeniably stoned image. From the moment he entered the green room, it was clear that his energy was unfiltered and authentic. There was no pretense, no attempt to fit a mold. The crew and producers knew exactly what to expect. Slow, meandering stories punctuated by bursts of laughter, pauses that seemed endless, and a charm that carried the entire space effortlessly. Unlike chaotic appearances by other guests, Chong's state was deliberate. It was part of his brand. He was not stumbling, not losing control. He was performing a version of himself that was larger than life, fully conscious of the image he projected. Johnny Carson, the masterful observer and improviser, recognized this immediately. He didn't intervene or attempt to rein Chong in. Instead, Johnny embraced the persona and worked around it with finesse. His raised eyebrows, subtle smiles, and occasional deadpan reactions became part of the comedic rhythm. The interaction wasn't about rescuing Chong from being high, it was about amplifying the humor that naturally arose from his relaxed demeanor. Every pause Chong took, every slow thought that wandered into tangents, became an opportunity for Johnny to highlight the contrast between the straight-laced host and the unconventional guest. The audience responded instantly, not laughing at Chong as if mocking him, but laughing with him, sharing in the unique energy that only he could bring to the stage. Behind the scenes, staff members often reflected on the difference between managing typical impaired guests and Cheech and Chong. For most impaired celebrities,
from being funny, the legendary Cheech and Chong are in conversation with Tracy Smith.
Producers and crew had elaborate contingency plans, cues to cut to commercials, subtle signals to Johnny to guide the conversation, or emergency interventions if the situation spiraled out of control. With Cheech and Chong, none of that was necessary. They were predictable in their unpredictability. Their timing might seem erratic, their storytelling non-linear, but it never crossed into chaos. The green room could relax, knowing that once they stepped on stage, the performance would flow naturally. It was a rare, almost magical situation where impairment and professionalism coexisted seamlessly. Johnny's mastery as a host allowed him to highlight this balance, ensuring the audience experienced a polished, entertaining segment without seeing the careful choreography behind the scenes. Chong's appearances were a masterclass in controlled spontaneity. Each story, no matter how meandering, was anchored by his genuine humor and charisma. The energy he brought to the show, unrushed, contemplative, and distinctly high, was not a liability, but a strength. Johnny's subtle cues, timing, and responses ensured that the humor landed perfectly, creating a rhythm that felt effortless to viewers but required skillful management behind the camera. This dynamic turned the duo into some of the most memorable guests in The Tonight Show history. Ultimately, Tommy Chong's high persona wasn't a liability. It was art. It demanded no rescue, no intervention, and no manipulation. Johnny Carson understood this deeply. Instead of trying to impose order, he worked with the natural flow, allowing Chong to inhabit the space fully. The result was television that felt organic, alive, and unforgettable. Viewers didn't just watch. They experienced the comedy as it unfolded naturally. A brilliant collaboration between a host who could manage energy without stifling it, and a guest whose identity thrived in a state most would fear. In Chong, being high wasn't just tolerated, it was the very foundation of entertainment that made these segments timeless. Peter Fonda, Lost in Another Place. Peter Fonda's Tonight Show appearance is still talked about decades later, and for good reason.
Peter Fonda has made 30 films, and he's currently starring in the NBC television world premiere movie, A Reason to Live.
From the moment he stepped onto the set, something felt off. His usual charm seemed muted. The smile that could light up a room didn't quite reach his eyes. Instead, his gaze kept drifting first to the studio lights, then to his hands, then back to the floor. It was as if he were somewhere else entirely, not the bright, controlled stage of Johnny Carson's Tonight Show. When Johnny asked him a straightforward question about a new project, Fonda's response was delayed, meandering, and almost hesitant. His focus shifted mid-sentence, and the rhythm of the conversation broke. Crew members behind the scenes exchanged nervous glances. They could sense that this wasn't a typical guest moment. Johnny Carson, ever the professional, instantly adapted. He didn't panic. He didn't call attention to Fonda's disorientation. Instead, he simplified everything. Questions became short, direct, almost yes or no. Pauses were calm and deliberate, giving Fonda time to respond without pressure. Johnny guided him gently, never making the audience aware of the struggle, happening in real time. It was a delicate balance. Keep the segment moving, preserve the guest's dignity, and maintain the illusion of effortless television. Every glance, nod, and card tap was a subtle cue, a silent language between host and crew designed to navigate unpredictable moments like this. The breaking point came quickly. A routine question about Fonda's upcoming work spiraled into a philosophical tangent about time folding in on itself. He described concepts that were abstract, confusing, and almost impossible to follow in real time. The structure of the interview dissolved. Carson recognized that the audience wouldn't benefit from watching the segment descend into incoherence. Within minutes, the segment ended early. No jokes, no dramatic commentary, just a clean, professional cut to the next part of the show. The control room exhaled collectively, the staff silently acknowledging Johnny's mastery in handling the moment. In the aftermath, there was no anger from Johnny, only practicality. He understood the limits of live television and the unpredictable nature of human behavior. Fonda returned to The Tonight Show years later, composed and sober, delivering a smooth, focused interview. That night, however, became part of Tonight Show lore, a story told quietly among crew and fans alike. It remains a striking example of how even a superstar could get lost in the strange, high-pressure world of live TV, and how Johnny Carson's calm professionalism ensured the show went on, no matter what. Oliver Reed. When high turned dangerous. Oliver Reed didn't just arrive high, he arrived volatile. From the moment he stepped onto the Tonight Show stage, his energy was sharp.
And this is the first time we've had him on the show, or at least we've had a chance to meet. Would you welcome, please, Oliver Reed?
Unpredictable and immediately concerning. At first, it seemed like his usual charismatic, larger-than-life persona. But within minutes, the mood shifted. Words were slurred, interruptions came rapidly, and gestures became exaggerated. Crew members who had worked countless live segments sensed something different this time. The air in the studio tightened, cameras shifted, and stagehands subtly moved closer, ready for anything. Security personnel, who usually blended into the background, positioned themselves visibly, anticipating a potential problem. This wasn't typical intoxication or playful eccentricity, it was an escalating threat that could spiral out of control at any moment. Johnny Carson's reaction was precise. He could sense the shift from playful unpredictability to genuine danger. His calm demeanor on camera never faltered, but those watching closely could see his focus sharpen. The casual charm that carried him through routine interviews disappeared. Johnny's voice became firm, his questions shorter and more direct. When Reed's behavior escalated to loud interruptions, sudden movements, and increasingly aggressive gestures, Johnny didn't hesitate. He cut off responses, redirected attention quickly, and ended the segment prematurely. It wasn't about entertainment anymore. It was about maintaining control, ensuring the safety of everyone on set, and salvaging what little could be salvaged of the broadcast. The consequences were immediate and lasting. Reed's future on The Tonight Show was over before it could recover. He was permanently banned, joining only a select few in television history whose conduct crossed the unspoken line between talented guest and dangerous liability. Behind the scenes, Johnny clarified his philosophy to staff. No matter how famous or beloved the performer, safety and professionalism came first. Being high or unpredictable could be handled with finesse, as he had done with other guests, but being threatening was unacceptable. Oliver Reed's appearance became a defining lesson for the show. It highlighted the delicate balance Johnny maintained between entertaining audiences and protecting the crew, the stage, and the integrity of live television. From that night forward, the rule was clear and enforced. Talent never outweighed safety. This boundary, once crossed, was never tested again, preserving the order and reliability of The Tonight Show, even amid the chaos of high-profile, unpredictable guests. These 7 guests didn't just test Johnny Carson. They revealed who he really was. He didn't judge. He measured. He knew the difference between creativity and chaos, between a guest who needed space and one who needed stopping. In an era before social media, these moments didn't explode into scandals. Johnny's calm buried them quietly. Careers survived. Dignity remained. Today, every mistake becomes permanent. Every pause becomes content. But back then, the goal was simple: make great television without harming the people on screen. Johnny Carson mastered that balance. 7 guests arrived high. Each pushed the limits in a different way, and each proved why Carson stayed on top for decades. If this surprised you, stay curious. Behind television's calmest smiles often hide the wildest stories, and sometimes the smoothest shows are held together by the fastest thinking minds. Thinking minds.